The screech of brakes was the last thing I remembered before waking up 3 days later in the ICU, my body a roadmap of bruises and my left leg suspended in traction. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive after the 18-wheeler ran the red light, but as I lay there watching the steady drip of morphine into my IV, luck felt like the last thing I had. "Mrs. Chen, you're awake," Dr. Martinez said, appearing at my bedside with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "How are you feeling?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. A nurse quickly brought me ice chips, and after a few minutes, I managed to croak out the question that had been haunting me since I'd regained consciousness. "Where's David, my husband?" The doctor and nurse exchanged a glance that made my stomach clench. "He was notified immediately after your accident," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "He's been handling the arrangements. The word felt cold and clinical, but I pushed down my unease. David was probably just overwhelmed, dealing with insurance companies and work obligations while I was unconscious. He'd always been practical, sometimes to a fault. "What's the damage?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood while gesturing weakly at my battered body. "3 broken ribs, a shattered femur, severe concussion, and internal bleeding that we've managed to stop," Dr. Martinez listed off with professional detachment. "You'll be here for at least 2 weeks, then several months of physical therapy. But you're going to make a full recovery, which is frankly miraculous given the severity of the impact." 2 weeks. I tried to process that information through the haze of pain medication. 2 weeks away from my life, my routine, my carefully ordered world. As a forensic accountant, I was used to being in control, analyzing patterns, finding discrepancies. Being helpless in a hospital bed felt like being trapped in someone else's nightmare. "Can I see my husband?" I asked. The nurse, whose name tag read Gloria, patted my hand gently. "Visiting hours are almost over, but I'll call him for you." As she left, I closed my eyes and tried to remember the accident. I'd been driving home from a client meeting, a complex embezzlement case that had kept me at the office until nearly 8 p.m. The light had been green, I was sure of it. Then nothing until the beeping of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell of recovery. My phone buzzed on the bedside table, and I reached for it with my good arm. The screen showed 17 missed calls from David, but they were all from the first day. Nothing since then. Confused, I scrolled through my recent messages. 3 from David on the day of the accident. "Heard about the accident, heading to hospital now." Then, "You're in surgery, waiting for news." Finally, "Doctors say you'll be okay. Need to handle some things. We'll be back soon." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. That was 3 days ago. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. His cheerful voice instructed me to leave a message, but I hung up without speaking. Something was wrong, and my forensic training was setting off alarm bells despite the morphine fog. "Mrs. Chen?" Gloria returned, her expression carefully neutral. "I spoke with your husband. He said he's tied up with work but will try to visit tomorrow." Try to visit? His wife of 7 years was lying in a hospital bed after nearly dying, and he would try to visit. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "What time did you call him?" I asked. "Just now, around 8:30. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was indeed 8:30, but something nagged at me. When Gloria had called, I'd heard laughter in the background before David answered. Not the subdued atmosphere you'd expect from someone whose wife was in the hospital, but actual laughter. Female laughter. Did he sound okay? I pressed. Gloria's pause was telling. He seemed distracted, but I'm sure he's just overwhelmed with everything. I nodded, but my mind was racing. In my line of work, I'd learned to trust my instincts about people's behavior patterns. David's absence, the timing of his calls, the background noise. It was creating a picture I didn't want to see. The next morning brought Dr. Martinez with better news about my recovery timeline and a business card. "This is from your insurance company," he said. "They need some documentation about your coverage. Apparently there's been some confusion about your policy status." I took the card with shaking fingers. My insurance was through David's company, where he worked as a senior sales manager. It should have been straightforward. "What kind of confusion?" "I'm not sure of the details, but the billing department said something about changes to your coverage that weren't properly processed. You might want to call them directly." After he left, I immediately dialed the insurance company. After navigating through several automated menus, I finally reached a human being. "Mrs. Chen." "Yes, I see the issue," the representative said after I explained my situation. "Your coverage was canceled 2 weeks ago at your husband's request. He cited divorce proceedings as the reason." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering onto the hospital tray table. Divorce proceedings. 2 weeks ago, David had canceled my insurance, and I'd been completely unaware. The day before my accident, he'd kissed me goodbye that morning like any other day, told me he loved me, reminded me to pick up his dry cleaning. I called back, my hands trembling as I dialed. "I need to understand this better," I said when I got through again. "What documentation did my husband provide to cancel my coverage?" He submitted a notarized affidavit stating that divorce papers had been filed, and he was no longer legally obligated to provide coverage for you. The effective date was 2 weeks ago. Notarized. David had gone to the trouble of having legal documents prepared, but he'd never mentioned divorce to me, never even hinted at problems in our marriage. Just 2 weeks ago, we'd discussed vacation, plans for the summer. He'd bought me flowers for no particular reason. We'd made love on a Saturday morning and talked about finally starting the family we'd been planning. "Can you tell me what address he used for correspondence?" I asked, though I was almost afraid to hear the answer. "I have 2 addresses on file. Your home address on Maple Street and a secondary address on Oak Avenue, Unit 4B. Oak Avenue." I'd never heard David mention Oak Avenue, and I certainly didn't know anyone who lived there. But apparently, he did. I spent the rest of the morning making phone calls, each one revealing another piece of a puzzle I'd been oblivious to while living my own life. Our joint credit cards had been canceled. The automatic payments for our mortgage had been redirected to come from an account I didn't have access to. David had even changed the emergency contact information on his work files, replacing my name with someone called Miranda Torres. Miranda Torres. I rolled the name around in my mind, trying to place it. David had never mentioned anyone by that name, but then again, he'd apparently been living an entire secret life while I was balancing our checkbook and planning our future. By afternoon, I'd managed to piece together enough information to understand that my husband had been systematically removing me from his financial life for weeks, possibly months. The precision of it was almost admirable from a professional standpoint. He'd covered all the bases, left no loose ends. It was the kind of thorough work I would have respected if it hadn't been designed to destroy my life. Gloria appeared during her shift change, bringing me a cup of tea and sitting down in the visitor's chair. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said gently. Something like that. I took a sip of the tea, grateful for the warmth. "Gloria, can I ask you something? When you called my husband yesterday, did you notice anything unusual about the background noise?" She hesitated, and I could see her weighing her words carefully. "I don't want to cause trouble, but it sounded like he was at a restaurant, or maybe a party. There was music playing, and I definitely heard a woman's voice." "What did she say?" I couldn't make out the words, but she was laughing. And then, "I heard your husband tell someone to keep it down for a minute." That's when he took my call. Keep it down for a minute. While his wife was lying in a hospital bed, David was somewhere social enough that he needed to quiet other people to take a call about my condition. The woman laughing in the background wasn't a concerned friend or family member. It was someone he was comfortable enough with to prioritize over a conversation about his critically injured wife. "Thank you for telling me," I said. Gloria reached over and squeezed my hand. "I've been a nurse for 22 years, honey. I've seen this before. Sometimes people show their true colors when life gets difficult." After she left, I lay in the gathering darkness of my hospital room, staring at the ceiling and trying to process the magnitude of David's betrayal. It wasn't just infidelity. It was systematic, calculated abandonment. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, while I'd been living in complete ignorance. But I hadn't built a career in forensic accounting by giving up when things got complicated. If David thought he could erase me from his life while I was unconscious and vulnerable, he was about to learn that he'd made a critical error in judgment. He'd underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. I reached for my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. Patricia Williams, a private investigator I'd worked with on several cases. If anyone could help me understand what David had been doing while I was lying in this hospital bed, it was her. "Patricia," I said when she answered. "It's Sarah Chen. I need your help with something personal." "Sarah? My God. I heard about your accident. How are you holding up?" "I'm alive, which is more than I can say for my marriage, apparently." "Can you meet me tomorrow? I need someone to look into my husband's activities over the past few weeks." "Of course. What are you thinking?" I stared out the window at the city lights, each one representing someone going about their normal life, while mine had been turned upside down. "I'm thinking David made a mistake. He thought I'd be too injured and too trusting to ask questions. But he forgot that I make my living finding things people try to hide." "I'll be there first thing in the morning," Patricia promised. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced since waking up in this hospital bed. Hope. Not hope for reconciliation. That ship had sailed the moment David canceled my insurance, without telling me. But hope for justice, for answers, and for the satisfaction of proving that no one could outmaneuver someone who'd spent their career following paper trails and uncovering lies. David might have thought he was playing chess while I was unconscious, but he was about to discover that I'd been playing a different game entirely. And in my game, the person with the most information always won. The night shift nurse came by for final checks, and I pretended to be asleep while she recorded my vitals and adjusted my IV, but my mind was fully awake, already planning my next moves. Tomorrow, Patricia would begin gathering the evidence I needed, and once I had that evidence, David would learn that betraying a forensic accountant was the worst mistake of his life. After all, I hadn't spent 7 years building what I thought was a partnership only to discover it was a con game. But if David wanted to play with deception and hidden assets, he'd picked the wrong opponent. The morphine was wearing off, and the pain in my leg was becoming more intense. But I welcomed it. It kept me sharp, focused, angry. And I was going to need all of that anger for what came next. Because if there was one thing I'd learned in my career, it was that the truth always surfaces eventually. And David's truth was about to destroy him. Patricia Williams arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying 2 coffee cups and a leather briefcase that I knew contained enough surveillance equipment to stock a small spy shop. At 52, she had the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent watching people at their worst, but her eyes were sharp and kind. "You look terrible," she said without preamble, settling into the visitor's chair and handing me one of the coffees. "Gee, thanks. Really know how to make a girl feel better," I replied, but I was grateful for her honesty. Patricia had never been one to sugarcoat reality. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a digital recorder. "Start from the beginning. And don't leave out any details, no matter how insignificant they seem." For the next hour, I walked her through every discovery I'd made since waking up. The canceled insurance, the redirected mortgage payments, the mysterious Miranda Torres. The background laughter during the nurse's phone call. Patricia took notes in her neat shorthand, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed she was already thinking several steps ahead. "The timing is interesting," she said when I finished. "He didn't just wake up one morning and decide to leave you. This was planned. The insurance cancellation 2 weeks before your accident, the address changes, the new emergency contact. He's been building an exit strategy. But why not just divorce me properly? Why all the secrecy?" Patricia's expression darkened. "In my experience, when someone goes to this much trouble to hide their tracks, it's because they're hiding more than just an affair. They're usually hiding assets too." The implication hit me like a physical blow. David wasn't just leaving me for another woman. He was stealing from me in the process. Everything we'd built together, every account we'd shared, every investment we'd made as a couple, he was systematically transferring to himself and his new life. "I need you to find out everything," I said, my voice harder than I'd intended. "Where he's living, who Miranda Torres is, what he's done with our money, and most importantly, I need proof of all of it." "What's your budget for this investigation?" I thought about our joint savings account, the one I'd been contributing to, faithfully for 7 years while planning our future together. "Whatever it takes. But Patricia, I need this done fast. The longer he thinks I'm helpless in this hospital bed, the more time he has to cover his tracks." She nodded, understanding the urgency. "I'll start with the basics. Surveillance of his current activities, background check on Miranda Torres, and a financial trace. But Sarah, I have to ask, are you prepared for what we might find? Sometimes the truth is worse than people imagine." "I've spent my career uncovering financial fraud," I replied. "I know how ugly people can get when money is involved. But this time, it's personal, and I need to know exactly how personal it's gotten." After Patricia left, I spent the morning making more phone calls. I contacted our bank, claiming I needed to review recent transactions for insurance purposes related to my accident. The customer service representative was sympathetic and helpful, especially when I mentioned being hospitalized. "Mrs. Chen," "Looking at your joint checking account here," she said. "There have been some significant transfers over the past 2 weeks. The largest was $47,000, moved to an external account last Tuesday. The day after my accident, while I was unconscious in the ICU, David had transferred nearly $50,000 out of our joint account. Money I'd earned, money we'd saved together for our future, gone while I couldn't even open my eyes." "Can you tell me which account received the transfer?" "I'm sorry, but I can only see that it went to Chase Bank. You'd need to contact them directly for more information about the receiving account." I thanked her and immediately called Chase. This time the process was more complicated, but I'd learned over the years that persistence and the right approach could unlock almost any information. "I'm calling about a large transfer that came into one of your accounts," I told the representative. "My husband handles our finances, but I'm in the hospital and need to verify some transactions for insurance purposes." After 20 minutes of back and forth and providing every piece of identifying information I could remember about David, I finally got what I needed. The money had gone into an account belonging to David Chen and Miranda Torres, a joint account. They weren't just having an affair, they were financially intertwined. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. David had opened a joint account with his mistress and was funding it with money from our marriage. The betrayal felt like a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But anger was quickly replacing hurt. As a forensic accountant, I'd seen this pattern before: the cheating spouse who tries to hide assets before filing for divorce. What David didn't realize was that he'd just handed me the evidence I needed to prove theft of marital assets. Dr. Martinez appeared for his afternoon rounds, checking my chart and examining my leg. "Your healing is progressing well," he said. "We might be able to discharge you a few days earlier than expected if you continue improving at this rate." "How much earlier?" possibly by next Tuesday instead of Friday. But you'll need someone at home to help you for the first few weeks. Have you discussed arrangements with your husband? The irony was almost laughable. We're still working out the details, I said diplomatically. After he left, I called my sister Julia in Portland. We'd always been close, despite the 3-hour drive between us, and she'd been texting constantly since hearing about my accident. Sarah, thank God you're okay. How are you feeling? Like I've been hit by a truck, which technically I have, I said. Julia, I need to ask you a favor. Can you come stay with me for a few weeks when I get out of the hospital? I'm going to need help, and David... I paused, not sure how much to reveal over the phone. David, what? Is he okay? David is fine. More than fine, apparently. It's a long story, but I could really use your support right now. Julia's voice immediately shifted to protective older sister mode. I'll drive down tomorrow. Sarah, what's going on? You sound strange. I'll explain everything when you get here. Just don't mention to anyone that you're coming, okay? I need to keep some things quiet for now. That evening, Patricia called. With her first report. I've been watching David's workplace and following him after hours, she said. He's definitely not acting like a man whose wife is in the hospital. What do you mean? Yesterday after work, he went to a furniture store. Spent 2 hours there with a woman matching Miranda Torres's description. They were looking at bedroom sets and dining room furniture, acting very much like a couple setting up house together. The image of David shopping for furniture with another woman while I lay in a hospital bed was almost surreal. What does Miranda look like? 28, brunette. Works as a marketing coordinator at a tech company downtown. Pretty in a conventional way. She's been posting photos on social media of what she calls her new life and fresh start. Some of the photos include expensive jewelry and designer handbags that are way above her salary range. Expensive jewelry and designer bags that David was probably buying with our money. My money. Keep following them. I want to know everywhere they go, everyone they see, everything they buy. There's more, Patricia continued. I ran a background check on Miranda. She has a history of relationships with married men. This isn't her first rodeo, Sarah. She knows exactly what she's doing. A professional husband stealer. Somehow that made it worse and better at the same time. Worse because David had been so easily manipulated. Better because it confirmed this wasn't about love or genuine connection. It was about money and what David could provide. One more thing, Patricia added. I checked public records, and Miranda Torres filed paperwork to start an LLC last month. Guess who's listed as the co-owner? David. Bingo. They're planning to start some kind of consulting business together. The paperwork shows an initial investment of $75,000. $75,000? More than our joint savings, more than what I'd seen transferred. David was liquidating everything we'd built together to fund a business with his mistress. The scope of his betrayal was breathtaking. Patricia, I need you to document everything. Every transaction, every meeting, every purchase. I want a complete record of what they're doing with marital assets. Already on it. But Sarah, there's something else you should know. I did some digging into their timeline, and based on social media posts and other evidence, this relationship has been going on for at least 8 months. Maybe longer. 8 months. While I'd been working late to build our financial security, David had been building a life with someone else. While I'd been discussing baby names and vacation plans, he'd been shopping for furniture and planning a business with his mistress. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with plans. David thought he was dealing with a helpless victim, someone too injured and too trusting to fight back. He'd calculated that he could systematically strip our marriage of assets while I was unconscious and unable to object, but he'd made a crucial error in judgment. He'd forgotten that I wasn't just his wife. I was a forensic accountant with a decade of experience in uncovering hidden assets and financial fraud. He'd handed me a puzzle, and solving puzzles was exactly what I did for a living. I pulled out my phone and started making a list of everything I needed to investigate further. Bank transfers, the LLC formation, property purchases, credit card, statements, insurance changes. Every financial move David had made in the past 8 months. By the time I was discharged from this hospital, I would have a complete picture of his deception. But more than that, I would have legal proof of theft of marital assets. David might have thought he was clever, but he'd left a paper trail that would destroy him in divorce court and possibly land him in criminal court as well. The next morning brought Julia, coffee, and a righteous fury that made me feel less alone than I had since waking up in this hospital bed. "I'm going to kill him," she announced after I'd filled her in on everything I'd discovered. Slowly and painfully. "Get in line," I replied. "But first, I need your help with something more productive than murder." I handed her a list I'd compiled during my sleepless night. "I need you to go to our house and gather some documents, financial records, tax returns, anything that shows our joint assets and income. But Julia, you have to be careful. If David is there, just leave. I don't want him to know we're investigating." "What if he asks why I'm there?" "Tell him you're picking up some things for me. Clothes, personal items. He's probably expecting that." Julia studied the list, her expression growing more determined. "Sarah, I need you to know that whatever happens, you're not alone in this. David might have betrayed you, but you've got family who will fight for you." After she left, I called Patricia for an update on the overnight surveillance. "They stayed at the Oak Avenue apartment last night," she reported. "This morning, David left for work like normal, but Miranda called in sick. She spent the day shopping, high-end stores, expensive purchases. She's not acting like someone who's worried about money. Because she's not worried. She's got David funding her lifestyle with my money." "There's something else. I managed to get some photos of them together yesterday evening. They were at a restaurant celebrating something. Very intimate, very comfortable. These aren't two people sneaking around. They're acting like an established couple." The photos Patricia sent to my phone confirmed everything I'd suspected. David, wearing a suit I'd bought him for his birthday last year, toasting with champagne across from a woman who was definitely not his wife. Miranda was wearing a necklace that looked expensive enough to represent a car payment. They looked happy, relaxed, completely untroubled by the fact that David's actual wife was lying in a hospital bed. But what struck me most was David's expression. I'd been married to him for 7 years, and I'd never seen him look at me the way he was looking at Miranda in these photos. There was an intensity there, a focus that made me realize our entire marriage might have been a performance on his part. The realization should have hurt more than it did, but instead it crystallized my resolve. David hadn't just betrayed our marriage vows. He'd stolen years of my life while planning his exit strategy. The least I could do was make sure his exit was as unpleasant as possible. Julia returned that afternoon with a box of documents and a grim expression. "I got everything on your list," she said. "But Sarah, there's something you need to know. The house looks different." "Different how?" "Some of your things are gone. Not obvious things, but personal items. That painting you loved from our trip to Santa Fe? Gone. Your grandmother's china cabinet? Empty. It's like he's been gradually erasing you from the space." The systematic erasure was almost more painful than the financial theft. David hadn't just been planning to leave. He'd been methodically removing traces of our life together, probably moving my belongings to storage or worse, selling them to fund his new life with Miranda. "There's more," Julia continued. "I checked the garage, and his golf clubs are gone. His expensive tools, his collection of vintage whiskey, all missing. But here's the weird part. He left all the furniture and appliances. It's like he took everything portable and valuable but left everything that would be obvious. Smart." David was being very careful to avoid anything that looked like obvious theft. By leaving the big items and only taking smaller valuables, he could claim he was just retrieving personal belongings if questioned later. But every item he'd taken, every gradual change he'd made to our shared space, was more evidence of his systematic plan to dissolve our marriage while keeping me in the dark. And thanks to my career in forensic accounting, I knew exactly how to document and value every missing item. Patricia called that evening with more intelligence. "I've been monitoring their communications," she said. "Tomorrow night, they're planning to celebrate something called Moving Day. Based on their text messages, David is officially moving out of your house and into the Oak Avenue apartment." Moving Day. While I was trapped in a hospital bed, David was celebrating his freedom and his new life. But his celebration was premature. He had no idea that every move he'd made was being documented. Every asset he'd stolen was being traced, and every lie he'd told was about to be exposed. "Patricia," I said, my voice steady with newfound determination. "I want you to be there tomorrow night. Document everything about their moving day celebration, because soon David is going to learn that the only thing he'll be moving into is a world of legal trouble." As I hung up the phone, I felt a shift in my thinking. I was no longer the victim of David's betrayal. I was the architect of his downfall. And unlike David, when I planned something, I didn't leave loose ends. The call from Patricia came at 6 a.m. on Thursday morning, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "Sarah, you need to see this footage." David's moving day celebration was illuminating. I'd been awake since 4, unable to sleep through the combination of physical pain and anticipation. "What did you find?" "I'll be there in an hour with the video, but I can tell you this much. They documented their own crimes for us." Miranda was filming everything like it was some kind of romantic milestone. While waiting for Patricia, I used the time to make more strategic phone calls. First, to my lawyer, Margaret Santos, who specialized in high-asset divorce cases. "Sarah, I'm so sorry to hear about your accident," Margaret said. "But I have to say, from a legal standpoint, the timing might actually work in your favor." "How so?" "David's actions while you were hospitalized and unable to consent to financial decisions could constitute theft of marital assets under duress. The fact that he canceled your insurance without notice while you were unconscious makes it even worse. This isn't just infidelity, it's financial abuse." "What are my options?" "Several. We can file for an immediate asset freeze, request an emergency hearing for spousal support, and pursue criminal charges for theft. But first, I need to see everything you've gathered. Documentation is going to be key here." My second call was to my accountant, Robert Kim, who handled both personal finances and consulted on my forensic cases. "Robert, I need you to do a complete audit of my personal accounts going back 12 months, I said. "I'm looking for any irregular transfers, hidden accounts, or suspicious activity that I might have missed." "This is about David, isn't it?" Robert's voice carried no surprise. "I always thought his lifestyle was a bit expensive for his salary range." That comment stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" "The past year, he's been asking about tax implications for various investments, side businesses, LLC formations. Always very hypothetical questions, but they seemed oddly specific for someone just curious about business structure." David had been planning this for over a year, using my own accountant to get information that would help him hide assets from me. The level of premeditation was staggering. "Robert, I need you to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Every consultation David had with you, every question he asked, every piece of advice you gave him. I want to know exactly how he's been using our professional relationships to plan his exit strategy." Patricia arrived with her laptop and a grim smile. "You're going to want to be sitting down for this," she said, settling into the visitor's chair and opening her computer. The video quality was crystal clear, shot through a telephoto lens from across the street. David and Miranda were on the apartment balcony, toasting with champagne while surrounded by boxes and furniture that I now recognized as items from our house. "This was taken at 8 p.m. last night," Patricia narrated. "About an hour after David officially moved out of your place." On screen, Miranda was holding up her phone, clearly making a video call. The audio Patricia had managed to capture through her directional microphone was patchy, but I could make out enough. "Finally free from that frigid bitch," David's voice, carried across the evening air. She was so focused on her boring job that she never noticed what was happening right under her nose. Miranda laughed, pressing closer to him. "I still can't believe she never suspected anything. 8 months, and she was completely clueless." "The best part," David continued, his voice getting louder as he warmed to his topic, "is that she's been funding our entire relationship without knowing it. Every dinner, every gift, every trip we took, all paid for with money from our joint accounts, while she thought she was saving for our future." My hands clenched into fists as I watched my husband mock our marriage and celebrate stealing from me while I lay in a hospital bed. But the video wasn't finished. Miranda held up what looked like a jewelry box. "Show them the ring," she called to whoever was on the video call. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring box. Even from Patricia's surveillance distance, I could see it was a large solitaire diamond. 3 carats, he announced proudly. "Cost more than Sarah makes in 2 months, but she'll never know because I used the emergency fund she's been building." For years. The emergency fund. $50,000 I'd slowly accumulated from bonuses and overtime. Money I'd saved for unexpected expenses or opportunities. Money I'd mentioned to David as our security blanket for the future. He'd stolen our security blanket to buy an engagement ring for his mistress. "Are you recording this?" I asked Patricia, my voice barely controlled. "Every second." But wait, there's more. On screen, David was now addressing the video call directly. "Mom, I know you had reservations about Miranda, but you have to understand, Sarah was never right for me. She's cold, she's obsessed with work, and she has no idea how to enjoy life. Miranda understands me in ways Sarah never could." His mother. David was celebrating his theft and betrayal with his mother's blessing, probably using the same story he'd been telling everyone else, that I was the problem in our marriage, that I was cold and workaholic and didn't deserve his loyalty. The video continued with more details about their plans. They were getting married in Las Vegas next month. David had already filed preliminary divorce papers, citing irreconcilable differences, and claiming I'd been emotionally absent from the marriage. He planned to present me with a settlement offer when I got out of the hospital, a generous offer, he called it, that would give me the house and half of what he claimed were our remaining assets. "Of course," he told the video call. "By the time she realizes what I've already moved, half of our real assets will be gone. But she's so trusting, so naive about money despite her job, that she'll probably just sign whatever I put in front of her." Patricia paused the video. "There's about 20 more minutes of this, but you get the idea. They've documented their entire scheme, including the asset hiding and the fraudulent insurance cancellation." I stared at the frozen image of David's smug face, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. He thought I was naive about money. He thought I was too trusting to question his version of events. He'd spent a year planning to steal from me while I was building what I thought was our future together. "Patricia, I want copies of everything. Full audio, enhanced video, timestamps, GPS coordinates proving where and when this was recorded. I want documentation that would hold up in both civil and criminal court. Already done. I've also got photos of them moving recognizable items from your house into the apartment. That painting you mentioned, some expensive electronics, boxes, that clearly came from your home office, the items from my home office, my client files, my financial software, my certification documents. If David had taken those, he might have access to confidential information that could destroy my career along with my marriage." "I need to get out of here," I said, reaching for the call button to summon a nurse. "Sarah, you're not ready." "Yes, I am. Every hour I stay in this hospital is another hour David has to cover his tracks and hide more assets. He thinks he's got time because he thinks I'm helpless. But he's wrong. Dr. Martinez was resistant to early discharge, but I was persistent. My recovery will be faster at home with proper support, I argued, and I have important business matters that need attention. What about physical therapy? I'll arrange outpatient therapy. Doctor, I understand the medical risks, but staying here is causing me more stress than leaving. It took 2 hours of negotiation, but finally, Dr. Martinez agreed to discharge me the following morning with a long list of restrictions and warnings. Julia immediately began arranging for a wheelchair, walker, and other equipment I'd need at home. That afternoon, I had 3 more visitors. First, Margaret Santos arrived with a briefcase full of legal documents. Based on the evidence you've shown me, we're filing multiple motions tomorrow, she said. Asset freeze, motion for emergency spousal support, and a request for an expedited hearing. But Sarah, I have to warn you, this is going to get ugly. David's not going to expect this level of pushback, and he might escalate. Let him escalate. I've got enough evidence to bury him. My second visitor was Robert Kim, carrying a thick folder of financial analysis. Sarah, you were right to be suspicious. I've found evidence of systematic asset diversion going back 14 months. Hidden credit cards, unauthorized transfers, even a second mortgage on your house that you apparently never signed for. The second mortgage was a new shock. How is that possible? Someone forged your signature. I compared it to known samples of your handwriting, and it's a decent fake, but not perfect. David's been using that mortgage money to fund his lifestyle with Miranda. How much? $87,000, secured against your house without your knowledge or consent. That's mortgage fraud, which is a federal crime. My third visitor was Detective Lisa Park, whom Patricia had contacted about the potential criminal aspects of David's behavior. Mrs. Chen, I've reviewed the preliminary evidence your investigator provided, she said. There are grounds for several charges here: theft, fraud, identity theft, and possibly more. But I want you to understand that pursuing criminal charges is a big step. It's not something you can take back once we start the process. Detective, my husband stole nearly $200,000 from me while I was unconscious in a hospital bed after nearly dying in a car accident. He forged my signature to mortgage our house without my knowledge. He canceled my insurance so I'd be left vulnerable if something happened. If that's not criminal behavior, I don't know what is. I agree. I'm opening an official investigation, as of today. That evening, as Julia helped me pack my few belongings for discharge, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. For the past week, I'd been gathering intelligence and building my case while lying helpless in a hospital bed. Tomorrow, I would be mobile again, back in my own environment, ready to take action. Are you sure you're ready for this? Julia asked, folding the clothes she'd brought from home. I've never been more ready for anything in my life, I replied. David thinks he's checkmated me. He thinks I'm going to quietly accept whatever settlement he offers and disappear from his life without a fight. But he's about to learn that he married a forensic accountant, not a victim. That night, I lay awake planning my next moves. First, I would secure the house and change all the locks. Then I would begin the process of tracing and recovering every asset David had stolen. Margaret would file the legal motions while Detective Park opened her criminal investigation. Patricia would continue surveillance to document any further illegal activity. But most importantly, I would begin preparing for the confrontation that was coming. David would receive the asset freeze order and realize that his perfect plan had fallen apart. He would probably try to intimidate me, or bargain with me, or convince me that we could work things out. He would discover that the woman he'd betrayed was not the same woman who would be waiting for him when he came crawling back. The Sarah Chen he'd married might have been trusting and naive about personal relationships, but the Sarah Chen he was about to face was a professional investigator with a decade of experience in financial warfare. And unlike David's amateur hour operation when I went to war, I left no survivors. The morning discharge paperwork took longer than expected, but by noon I was finally settling into the passenger seat of Julia's car, looking at my house for the first time since the accident. It looked smaller somehow, less like home and more like a crime scene. "Ready?" Julia asked, helping me navigate the front steps with my walker. "More than ready," I replied, fitting my key into the lock. Let's see what David left behind when he thought he was so clever. As the door opened, I stepped back into my life, or what was left of it after David's systematic pillaging. But I wasn't the same person who had left this house 10 days ago for a client meeting. I was someone who had learned exactly what betrayal looked like, what theft felt like, and what justice was going to cost. David's moving day celebration was about to become his moving day of reckoning. Walking through my own house felt like conducting a forensic investigation at a crime scene. Every empty space, every missing item, every subtle change told a story of systematic betrayal that made my professional work seem simple by comparison. "He took the Waterford crystal," Julia observed, staring at the empty display cabinet in the dining room. "Grandma's wedding gift to you." I photographed the empty shelves, making mental notes about insurance claims and asset recovery. The crystal had been worth $8,000, but its sentimental value was irreplaceable. David knew that, which made its theft particularly cruel. Moving through the house with my walker, I documented everything with my phone camera. The empty spaces where my grandmother's china had been displayed, the missing artwork from our European vacation. The vacant spot where David's expensive sound system had stood, a system I'd bought him for our anniversary 2 years ago. But it was my home office that revealed the true scope of his violation. "Sarah," Julia called from the doorway, her voice strained. "You need to see this." My office looked like it had been professionally burglarized. File cabinets stood open and empty. My client files, containing confidential financial information for dozens of cases, were gone. My computer was missing, along with backup drives and even my professional certification documents. "He didn't just steal from me," I said, sinking into my desk chair. "He stole from my clients." Those files contained privileged information, social security numbers, financial records. If any of that information gets misused, I could lose my license. The phone rang, startling both of us. The caller ID showed David's number. I gestured for Julia to be quiet and answered on speaker. "Sarah, thank God you're home. I was so worried about you." David's voice carried his practiced tone of concern, the same voice he'd used when convincing me he was devoted husband material. "Were you worried, David?" "Because I have to say, your way of showing concern has been unique." A pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean visiting me exactly 0 times while I was in the hospital. I mean canceling my insurance without telling me. I mean the interesting changes to our financial accounts while I was unconscious." Another, longer pause. "Sarah, we need to talk. There are some things I need to explain." "Oh, there are definitely things that need explaining, like why Miranda Torres is listed as your emergency contact at work, or why you opened a joint account with her using money from our marriage, or why you forged my signature on a second mortgage." The silence stretched so long I thought he might have hung up. "How did you—" He started, then stopped. "Look, this isn't a conversation we should have over the phone. I'm coming over." "No, you're not. You don't live here anymore, remember? Moving day and all that." "Sarah, be reasonable. We're still married. It's still my house, too." "Actually, David, about that. You'll be receiving some legal documents tomorrow that will clarify your current status regarding this house and our assets. I think you'll find them very educational." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Julia was staring at me with something approaching awe. "That was incredibly satisfying to listen to," she said. "Did you hear how his voice changed when he realized you knew about Miranda and the accounts?" He went from fake concern to panic in about 30 seconds. He thought he had more time before I figured things out. My phone immediately started ringing again, David calling back. I declined the call and turned off the ringer. Within minutes, text messages began flooding in. Sarah, please let me explain. It's not what you think. We can work this out. Don't do anything rash. Think about what you're throwing away. The last message made me laugh out loud. What I was throwing away? David had already thrown away our marriage, our trust, our shared future, and most of our shared assets. I was just cleaning up the debris. Margaret Santos called an hour later with updates on the legal filings. The asset freeze motion has been filed and will be heard tomorrow morning, she said. I've also filed for emergency spousal support and exclusive use of the marital home. David's going to wake up tomorrow to discover his world has changed significantly. What about the criminal referral? Detective Park has opened an official investigation. They'll probably want to interview you formally in the next few days. The evidence you've provided is substantial. Forgery, theft, fraud. This goes way beyond a messy divorce. That evening, Patricia called with more intelligence. From her continued surveillance, David's having a very bad day, she reported with satisfaction. After your phone call, he went straight to Miranda's apartment. They've been arguing for hours. I can see them through the windows. Lots of pacing, lots of gesturing. She's clearly upset about something. Probably upset that their perfect plan is falling apart. Gets better. Around 5 p.m., David left the apartment and went to 3 different banks. I followed him to each one. Based on his body language and the short duration of each visit, I'd guess he was trying to access accounts and running into problems. The asset freeze was already taking effect. David was discovering that moving money isn't as easy when you're under investigation for financial fraud. He made one more stop that was interesting, Patricia continued. A storage unit facility on the south side. He was there for about an hour, loading boxes into his car. Want to bet that's where he's been stashing your belongings? Can you get the unit number? Already have it. Unit 247. I've got photos of him accessing it and loading items. If you want to recover your property, we now know where to look. The next morning brought a parade of legal proceedings that would have been overwhelming if I hadn't been so focused on justice. Julia drove me to the courthouse, where Margaret had arranged for me to attend the asset freeze hearing. Judge Hamilton was a stern woman in her 60s who had clearly seen every type of marital misconduct imaginable. She reviewed the evidence quickly and efficiently. Mr. Chen, she addressed David, who was sitting across the courtroom with a lawyer he'd apparently hired overnight. The evidence presented suggests systematic concealment and theft of marital assets. Do you dispute these allegations? David's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who kept adjusting his tie, stood up. Your Honor, my client acknowledges that there have been some financial irregularities, but this is a case of marital discord, not criminal activity. Judge Hamilton looked at him over her reading glasses. Mr. Phillips, forging your client's wife's signature on a mortgage document while she was unconscious in a hospital is not marital discord. It's fraud. The asset freeze is granted immediately, and Mr. Chen is ordered to provide a complete accounting of all marital assets within 72 hours. David's face went white as the judge continued. Furthermore, Mrs. Chen is granted exclusive use of the marital home, and Mr. Chen is ordered to return all property removed from said home within 48 hours. Any violation of these orders will result in immediate arrest for contempt of court. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since before my accident. David's carefully constructed plan was crumbling, and he was finally facing consequences for his actions. But the real confrontation was still coming. That afternoon, David appeared at my front door, no longer bothering with fake concern or manipulative charm. His face was flushed with anger, and his expensive suit was wrinkled like he'd been wearing it for days. You can't do this to me, he said through the screen door. 7 years of marriage and you're going to destroy me over a mistake? A mistake? I remained seated in my wheelchair, speaking to him through the locked screen. David, you stole nearly $200,000 from me while I was unconscious. You forged my signature on legal documents. You canceled my insurance, hoping I'd be left vulnerable. Which part of that was a mistake? The money was from our joint accounts. Money you moved without my knowledge or consent while I was unable to protest. That's theft, David. And the second mortgage you took out in my name? That's fraud. He pressed his face closer to the screen. Sarah, you're being manipulated by your lawyer and that crazy sister of yours. This doesn't have to be so complicated. We can settle this quietly, divide everything fairly. Like how you fairly divided our emergency fund when you bought Miranda a 3-carat engagement ring. His face went even redder. How did you— I know about everything, David. The LLC you started with Miranda using our money. The furniture shopping while I was in the ICU. The celebration video where you called me a frigid bitch and bragged about stealing from me. Everything. For the first time since I'd known him, David looked genuinely afraid. You've been spying on me. I've been investigating financial crimes. It's what I do for a living, remember? You might have forgotten that while you were planning to destroy my career along with my marriage. I never meant you took my client files, David. Confidential information that could destroy my professional reputation and violate attorney-client privilege. That wasn't about money or Miranda. That was about making sure I couldn't recover from what you did to me. He stepped back from the door, his bravado crumbling. Sarah, please. Let me make this right. We can start over. Start over? I laughed. But there was no humor in it. David, you spent 8 months building a life with another woman while lying to my face every single day. You stole from me, you betrayed me, and you tried to leave me financially and professionally destroyed. There's no starting over from that. But I love you. No, you don't. You love what I represented. Financial security, respectability, someone to fund your lifestyle while you played house with your girlfriend. But you never loved me, David. If you had, you wouldn't have been capable of what you did. He stood there for a long moment, seeming to deflate as the reality of his situation finally sank in. What do you want? He asked finally. I want every asset you stole returned. I want my client files back. I want my grandmother's china and the Waterford crystal and every other item you took from this house. I want a complete accounting of every penny you spent on Miranda and your new life together. And then? And then you face the consequences of your choices. Criminal charges, civil penalties, professional consequences. Everything you earned through your actions. Sarah, please. You have 47 hours left to comply with the court order, David. I suggest you start making lists. As he walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. Not the peace of forgiveness or reconciliation, but the peace of knowing that justice was finally being served. Patricia called that evening with one final piece of intelligence. David and Miranda had another fight after he got back from your place, she reported. This time it was loud enough that the neighbors complained. Based on what I could overhear, Miranda is not happy about the legal situation. She apparently thought David had everything figured out. Reality has a way of intruding on fantasy, I replied. There's more. Miranda left the apartment with 2 suitcases about an hour ago. I followed her to the airport. She booked a one-way ticket to Phoenix, leaving tomorrow morning. The rats were abandoning the sinking ship. Miranda had been happy to help David, steal from his injured wife as long as she thought there would be no consequences. But faced with criminal investigations and asset recovery lawsuits, she was cutting her losses and running, which meant David would be facing the music alone, exactly as he deserved. That night, for the first time since my accident, I slept peacefully in my own bed. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more confrontations, more work toward recovering what David had stolen. But tonight, I was home. I was safe, and I was no longer the victim of David's betrayal. I was the architect of his downfall, and his destruction was proceeding exactly according to plan. The 48-hour deadline Judge Hamilton had given David was ticking down, and by Thursday afternoon, It was clear he had no intention of complying voluntarily. Patricia's surveillance confirmed he'd spent the day frantically moving between storage units, banks, and meetings with lawyers, but nothing had been returned to my house. "He's in full panic mode," Patricia reported during her evening check-in. "I watched him at 3 different storage facilities today, clearly trying to hide more assets. He's also been to 2 pawn shops. I think he's liquidating smaller valuable items for cash. Destroying evidence and hiding assets while under court order," I noted, adding this to my growing file. "That's contempt of court and obstruction." David's digging himself deeper every hour. Detective Park called shortly after Patricia's report. "Mrs. Chen, we've executed search warrants on the storage units your investigator identified. You were right. We found dozens of items that were clearly taken from your home, plus extensive financial records that David was apparently trying to hide." "What kind of financial records?" "Bank statements for accounts we didn't know existed, correspondence with overseas investment firms, documentation for shell companies. It looks like David's financial deception goes back much further than we initially thought." Overseas investment firms, shell companies. David hadn't just been stealing from me for 8 months. He'd been building a complex financial structure, designed to hide assets for years. The man I'd been married to was essentially a stranger who'd been living a completely fabricated life. "There's something else," Detective Park continued. "We found evidence that David was planning to disappear entirely. Fake identity documents, travel itineraries, even a lease agreement for a property in Costa Rica under an assumed name." The scope of David's deception was breathtaking. This wasn't just about leaving me for Miranda. He'd been planning to vanish. Completely. Taking everything we'd built together and starting a new life where I'd never be able to find him or recover what he'd stolen. "Detective, I need to know, would I ever have seen any of this money again if I hadn't started investigating?" "Honestly, probably not. David was very thorough in his planning. If you hadn't been a forensic accountant with the skills to trace financial crimes, he would have gotten away with it completely." That evening brought an unexpected visitor. David's mother, Eleanor, stood on my doorstep looking older than I remembered and clutching a manila envelope. "Sarah, may I come in? I have something that belongs to you." I'd always had a complicated relationship with Eleanor. She'd never quite approved of her son marrying someone so focused on career over family, but she'd been polite and cordial during our marriage. Seeing her now, she looked genuinely distressed. "Please, sit down," I said, gesturing to the living room chair that had once been her son's favorite spot. "I need to apologize," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I knew David was seeing someone else. I knew about Miranda, and I encouraged him." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "You knew?" "For months. He told me you two were having problems, that you were cold and distant, that the marriage was effectively over. He said you were so buried in your work that you didn't care about him anymore." She paused, tears forming in her eyes. "I believed him. I thought he deserved to be happy." "And now?" Eleanor handed me the manila envelope. "Now I know what kind of man I raised, and I'm ashamed. These are documents David asked me to hold for him. I didn't look at them until yesterday, after I heard about the court proceedings." Inside the envelope were copies of financial documents, including statements for the overseas accounts Detective Park had mentioned. But more damning were handwritten notes in David's writing, detailing his plan to drain every account before Sarah realizes what's happening, and make sure she can't practice forensic accounting anymore by destroying her professional reputation. "Plan to destroy my career," I said, reading through David's notes. This wasn't just about the money. He wanted to make sure I couldn't recover financially or professionally. "There's more," Eleanor said quietly. "David also gave me a key to a safety deposit box. He said it was for emergency documents, but after reading those papers, I think you should have it." She handed me a small key attached to a tag from First National Bank. Box 1247. Sarah, I know this doesn't undo what my son has done, but I want you to know that not everyone in his family supported his actions. After Eleanor left, I sat in my living room holding the key and trying to process the revelation that David's betrayal had been even more systematic than I'd discovered. He hadn't just been stealing from me, he'd been planning to destroy my ability to recover or rebuild my life. Julia returned from the grocery store to find me staring at the key. "What's that?" I explained Eleanor's visit and the safety deposit. I think David was hiding more than just money. He was hiding evidence of how extensive his planning really was. "We should go there tomorrow," Julia said immediately. "We should call Margaret first. If there's evidence of additional crimes in that box, I want everything properly documented." Margaret agreed to meet us at the bank the next morning, along with Detective Park, to ensure any evidence we found would be admissible in court proceedings. The safety deposit box contained David's complete blueprint for destroying my life. There were photographs of me leaving client meetings, detailed notes about my daily routines, copies of my professional correspondence that he'd somehow obtained, and most chilling of all, a written plan titled Exit Strategy, Complete Financial, and Professional Destruction. Detective Park photographed every document while Margaret reviewed the legal implications. "This is premeditation on a level I've rarely seen," Margaret said, studying David's handwritten timeline. "He was planning this for over 2 years, not 8 months. Every aspect of your life together was part of his long-term strategy." The timeline showed David's calculation and patience. He'd begun creating shell companies and hidden accounts 6 months after our wedding. He'd started photographing me and documenting my schedule over a year ago. The relationship with Miranda was just the final phase of a plan that had been in motion for most of our marriage. "Sarah," Detective Park said, reviewing the photographs David had taken of me without my knowledge, "this crosses into stalking territory. Combined with the financial crimes, we're looking at federal charges that could put him away for a decade or more." Among the documents was something that made my blood run cold, a forged copy of my will, leaving everything to David in the event of my death, with Miranda Torres listed as witness. The date on the forged will was 3 days before my car accident. "He was prepared for me to die in that accident," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "If I hadn't survived, he would have inherited everything, and Miranda would have vouched for the authenticity of this fake will." Margaret's face was grim as she examined the forged document. "Sarah, this changes everything. This isn't just theft and fraud. This is conspiracy and possible attempted murder." "You think David caused my accident? I think we need to have the police investigate your accident more thoroughly. The timing of this forged will is incredibly suspicious." Detective Park was already on her phone, calling the traffic investigation unit. "We need to reopen the Chen accident case," she said. "Possible attempted murder, financial motive established." That afternoon brought a call from the detective who'd originally investigated my accident. "Mrs. Chen, I've been reviewing the accident. Report in light of the new information Detective Park provided," he said. "There are some inconsistencies I'd like to discuss with you." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "The truck driver who hit you claimed his brakes failed, but mechanical inspection showed the brakes were in perfect working order. He also claimed he couldn't remember much about the accident, but witnesses said he seemed to accelerate into the intersection rather than trying to stop." "Are you saying it wasn't an accident?" "I'm saying we need to investigate the possibility that someone paid the truck driver to hit your car. The driver has a history of financial problems and suddenly paid off $30,000 in debt the day after your accident." $30,000. About the amount David had transferred from our emergency fund the week before my accident, according to the bank records I'd obtained. The truck driver, Carl Morrison, was arrested that evening on charges of attempted murder and conspiracy. Under questioning, he admitted that David had approached him weeks before the accident, offering him $40,000 to cause an accident that would look like brake failure. Patricia called with updates on David's current state. He's barricaded himself in a motel room across town, she reported. Hasn't come out in 12 hours. I think he knows the walls are closing in. Has he tried to contact me? Multiple times. Calls, texts, even tried to get someone else to call. You on his behalf. He's desperate to make some kind of deal. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone rang. David's number appeared on the screen, and for the first time since this ordeal began, I answered. Sarah, thank God. We need to meet. I can explain everything. You can explain how you hired someone to try to kill me? The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, David finally said, his voice broken. Carl was only supposed to cause a minor accident, just enough to what, David? To put me in the hospital long enough for you to steal everything and disappear? I never meant for you to get hurt so badly. When I saw how serious your injuries were, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Your terrible mistake wasn't the severity of my injuries, David. Your terrible mistake was trying to have me killed so you could steal my life's work and run away with your mistress. Sarah, please. I'll give everything back. I'll confess to everything. Just please don't let them destroy me completely. You destroyed yourself, David. Every choice you made, every crime you committed, every lie you told. You did all of that. I'm just making sure you face the consequences. I love you. No, David, you tried to murder me. That's the opposite of love. I hung up and immediately called Detective Park. David just confessed to hiring Carl Morrison to cause my accident. I recorded the conversation. We'll pick him up tonight. Sarah, this is over. David's going to prison for a very long time. That evening, I sat in my living room with Julia, watching the news report about David's arrest. The reporter mentioned attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, theft, and a dozen other charges. The man I'd been married to for 7 years was being led away in handcuffs, looking nothing like the confident salesman who'd convinced me to share my life with him. How do you feel? Julia asked gently. I considered the question carefully. Relieved, vindicated, and grateful that I'm alive to see justice being served. Do you think you'll ever be able to trust someone again? Someday, maybe. But I'll never again ignore red flags or assume someone loves me just because they say they do. David taught me that actions reveal character, not words. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Miranda Torres arrested at Phoenix Airport trying to board international flight with fake passport. Apparently, David's exit strategy included contingency plans for both of them. The entire conspiracy was unraveling exactly as it should. David and Miranda had thought they were so clever, so thorough in their planning. But they'd made one critical error. They'd underestimated the woman they were betraying. As a forensic accountant, I'd spent my career following paper trails and uncovering financial crimes. I knew how criminals thought, how they operated, and, most importantly, how they inevitably made mistakes that led to their downfall. David and Miranda had given me the greatest case of my career, and I'd solved it completely. Now they would spend years in prison contemplating the cost of their greed and cruelty. But for me, the real victory wasn't their punishment. It was my survival, my recovery, and my return to the life they'd tried to steal from me. The aftermath of David and Miranda's arrests brought a parade of revelations that made their original crimes seem almost simple by comparison. Detective Park called me 3 days after David's arrest, with news that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Sarah, we've been digging deeper into David's financial records, and what we've found is staggering, she said. Your husband wasn't just planning to steal from you. He's been running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme at his company for at least 3 years. I was in my home office, surrounded by boxes of recovered items that David had been forced to return before his arrest. My grandmother's china sat in careful stacks on my desk, each piece a small victory reclaimed. What kind of embezzlement? He was creating fake vendor accounts, approving inflated invoices, and routing the excess payments to shell companies he controlled. We're talking about nearly $400,000 stolen from his employer over 3 years. $400,000. The scale of David's criminality was expanding by the day. Does his company know? They're being briefed this morning. I suspect David's going to face additional federal charges for wire fraud and money laundering. The FBI is taking over that aspect of the investigation. After Detective Park hung up, I sat in my office trying to process the magnitude of David's deception. He hadn't just been betraying me. He'd been systematically stealing from everyone around him while maintaining the facade of a successful, honest businessman. My phone rang again. This time it was Margaret Santos with updates on the row, civil proceedings. "Sarah, David's criminal attorney contacted me this morning," she said. "He wants to discuss a plea agreement. Apparently, David is willing to make full restitution and cooperate with all investigations in exchange for a reduced sentence." "What kind of reduced sentence?" "Instead of 25 to 30 years, he's hoping for 10 to 15. But here's the interesting part. He's claiming he has information about other criminal activities that might be valuable to prosecutors." Other criminal activities. David's web of lies and crimes apparently extended beyond even what we'd discovered. What kind of information? He won't say until he has a formal plea agreement, but his lawyer hinted that it involves other people at his company and possibly some of Miranda's previous relationships with married men. The possibility that David and Miranda had been running some kind of broader scheme targeting wealthy married men was both fascinating and horrifying from a professional standpoint. But personally, I just wanted this nightmare to end. "Margaret, I don't care what deal he makes with prosecutors as long as I get full restitution and he serves significant prison time. He tried to murder me. There has to be consequences for that." "Understood. I'll make sure any plea agreement includes full financial recovery for you and appropriate punishment for the attempted murder charge." That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor, Carl Morrison, the truck driver who had hit me, flanked by his attorney and Detective Park. "Mrs. Chen," his lawyer began, "my client wanted to meet with you personally to apologize and to provide information that might help with your recovery." Carl Morrison was a thin man in his 50s with calloused hands and eyes that couldn't quite meet mine. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, I know there's nothing I can say that will make up for what I did to you. I've got grandchildren your age, and I don't know how I convinced myself to do something so terrible." "Why did you agree to it?" I asked. "My daughter needed surgery. Cancer surgery, and I didn't have insurance to cover it. $40,000 would have saved her life, and your husband made it sound like you'd just be bruised up a little. He never said anything about how badly you'd be hurt." "But you knew it was wrong." Carl nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I knew it was wrong. I've been driving trucks for 30 years without an accident, and I threw it all away for money. But Mrs. Chen, there's something your husband didn't know I knew." Detective Park leaned forward. "What's that, Carl?" "I have a dash cam in my truck. Always have for insurance purposes. When Mr. Chen approached me the first time, I was so nervous about what he was asking that I left the camera running during our meeting." The room went silent. "You have David on video asking you to cause my accident?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am. Clear video and audio of him explaining exactly what he wanted me to do and how much he'd pay me to do it." I gave the footage to Detective Park. "Yesterday." Detective Park nodded. "We've reviewed the footage. It's damning evidence that will make David's plea negotiations much more difficult. A premeditated murder-for-hire scheme recorded in high definition doesn't leave much room for claiming it was a momentary lapse in judgment." After Carl and his lawyer left, I found myself in the strange position of feeling sorry for a man who had nearly killed me. His desperation to save his daughter's life didn't excuse his actions, but it made them understandable in a way that David's calculated greed never could be. Patricia called that evening with updates on Miranda's situation. "She's singing like a canary," Patricia reported. Apparently, this wasn't her first rodeo with married men and financial schemes. The FBI has connected her to at least 3 other cases where wealthy husbands mysteriously divorced their wives after meeting Miranda and then lost significant assets in the process. She's a professional husband thief? More than that, she's part of an organized operation. They target successful married men, seduce them, convince them to hide assets and leave their wives, then disappear with the money once the divorce is final. David was just her latest mark. The revelation that David hadn't been Miranda's partner but her victim added another layer of irony to the situation. The man who had tried to murder me for money had himself been conned by a professional criminal who specialized in exactly his type of weakness. The really interesting part, Patricia continued, is that Miranda apparently recorded her conversations with David as insurance against him turning on her. The FBI has hours of audio of David discussing his plans to steal from you, kill you, and disappear with Miranda to Costa Rica. How many recordings? Dozens, starting from their first meeting 8 months ago all the way up to the day before your accident. Miranda documented everything, probably planning to blackmail David later if their relationship went sour. Miranda's recordings would provide prosecutors with a complete timeline of David's planning and premeditation. Every conversation about stealing from me, every discussion of forged documents, every detail of the murder plot, all captured in David's own voice as he bragged to his accomplice about how clever he was being. The next morning brought a call from David's criminal attorney, requesting a meeting. "My client would like to speak with you directly," the lawyer said. "He has some things he wants to say that might help with your healing process." Is this about his plea negotiations? Partially. But David claims he has information that you need to know for your own safety and financial security. Against Margaret's advice, I agreed to meet with David at the county jail. I needed to look him in the eye one more time and hear whatever final manipulation he was planning to attempt. The man sitting across from me in the jail's visitor room bore little resemblance to the confident husband I'd been married to for 7 years. David had lost weight. His skin was pale from lack of sunlight, and his expensive clothes had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller somehow. "Sarah, thank you for coming," he said, his voice lacking any of its former charm. "I know you have no reason to trust anything I say, but there are things you need to know. I'm listening. First, I want you to know that I never meant for you to be hurt so badly in the accident. Carl was supposed to cause a minor fender bender, just enough to put you in the hospital for a few days while I finished moving assets. When I saw how badly you were injured, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Your mistake was trying to have me killed at all, David. I know that now. But Sarah, there's something else. Miranda wasn't just using me. She was planning to kill me too once we got to Costa Rica." The statement was so unexpected that I almost laughed. "What?" "I found out 3 days before your accident. She'd been in contact with someone in Costa Rica, making arrangements for my disappearance. Once the money was transferred, I was never supposed to survive our new life together." "And you know this how?" David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small recording device. "I started recording our conversations when I got suspicious. This is from the day before your accident." He pressed play, and Miranda's voice filled the small room. "Once we're in Costa Rica and all the money is transferred, we won't need David anymore. Luis has everything arranged. It'll look like a robbery gone wrong. David disappears, I inherit everything as his common law wife under Costa Rican law, and the trail goes cold." David's voice on the recording was shocked. "You're talking about murdering me?" "I'm talking about cleaning up loose ends. You think I'm going to spend my life looking over my shoulder wondering if you'll get guilty about your wife and turn us both in? This is cleaner." David stopped the recording and looked at me with haunted eyes. "I was planning to kill you, and she was planning to kill me. We were all victims of each other's greed and manipulation. Except I was an innocent victim, David. You chose to be a criminal. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness or sympathy. I'm warning you that even though Miranda is in custody, she has associates who might still see you as a threat to their operation. Luis, the man she mentioned, is still in Costa Rica with connections to organized crime. Why are you telling me this? David looked down at his shackled hands. Because despite everything I've done, I did love you once. Maybe not the way I should have. Maybe not enough to overcome my greed and stupidity. But I did love you. And I don't want my crimes to result in you being hurt by people I brought into your life. Detective Park will need to hear that recording. I've already given copies to the FBI and local police. They're coordinating with international authorities to investigate Miranda's network. As I left the jail, I found myself in the surreal position of being grateful to the man who had tried to murder me for warning me about additional threats to my safety. David's revelation that he'd also been marked for death by Miranda added another layer to an already complex criminal conspiracy. But it also provided a strange kind of closure. David's crimes against me had been motivated by greed and selfishness, but they'd also been part of his own victimization by professional criminals who saw him as a disposable tool in their larger scheme. That evening, FBI agents visited my house to discuss the international aspects of Miranda's operation and to arrange additional security measures until her associates could be located and arrested. Mrs. Chen, Agent Rodriguez explained, we've identified at least 12 other victims of this network over the past 5 years. Miranda and her associates have stolen an estimated $3 million from wealthy couples by manipulating husbands into betraying their wives. How many of the wives survived? I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. You're the first. In every other case, the wife either died in an accident or disappeared entirely. Your survival and your professional skills in uncovering the conspiracy have broken open a case we've been working on for 2 years. The knowledge that I was the only wife to survive Miranda's operation was both sobering and motivating. My investigation hadn't just saved my own life and recovered my assets, it had exposed a criminal network that had destroyed families and murdered innocent people. As the FBI agents left, I realized that my ordeal with David and Miranda was ending, but my involvement in bringing their network to justice was just beginning. I would be testifying in multiple trials, helping other victims recover assets, and working with law enforcement to ensure that no other wives would suffer what I'd been through. But tonight, I was alive. I was safe, and the man who had tried to destroy me was facing the consequences of his choices. That was enough for now. The empire of lies that David had built around our marriage was finally crumbling, taking him and his accomplices down with it. And I would be there to watch every brick fall. 6 weeks after David's arrest, I found myself sitting in a federal courthouse conference room facing a table full of law enforcement officials from 3 different agencies. My role had evolved from victim to star witness in what Agent Rodriguez called the largest organized marriage fraud and murder conspiracy we've ever uncovered. Mrs. Chen, Agent Rodriguez began, sliding a thick folder across the table. Thanks. To your investigation and the evidence you helped us gather, we've identified the full scope of Miranda's operation. What you're about to see will shock you. The folder contained photographs, financial records, and case summaries for 12 different couples across 7 states. Each case followed the same pattern. A successful married man meets an attractive woman, begins an affair, starts hiding assets from his wife, and then the wife dies in an accident shortly before the husband planned to disappear with his mistress. The Hendersons in Dallas, Agent Rodriguez continued, pointing to the first case file. Margaret Henderson died in a house fire that investigators initially ruled accidental. Her husband Thomas had moved $200,000 to offshore accounts the week before her death. He disappeared to Mexico 3 days after her funeral. Case after case told the same horrifying story. Karen Sullivan in Phoenix, killed in a home invasion robbery that took nothing of value but coincidentally happened the day before her husband was scheduled to meet with a divorce attorney. Linda Martinez in Denver, who died in a carbon monoxide leak that investigators later determined was caused by a deliberately damaged furnace. In every case, Agent Rodriguez explained, the husband had been romantically involved with a woman matching Miranda Torres's description, or one of her known associates. They would seduce the mark, convince him to hide marital assets, and then eliminate the wife to avoid messy divorce proceedings that might expose the financial crimes. How many women are involved in this network? I asked, studying the photographs of smiling wives who would never see justice for their murders. At least 8 that we've identified so far. Miranda appears to be the ringleader, but they have associates across the country. Some handle the seduction and manipulation, others specialize in the financial crimes, and a few focus on the elimination aspect. FBI agent Martinez, a woman about my age with kind eyes and a steel-hard voice, leaned forward. Sarah, you're the first wife who survived because you're the first one who had the professional skills to uncover what was happening before they could complete their plan. Your forensic accounting background saved your life. What about the husbands? Are they all victims or accomplices? That's complicated, Agent Rodriguez admitted. Some, like your husband, were clearly willing participants who knew the ultimate plan included murdering their wives. Others seem to have been manipulated into believing their wives would just be frightened or intimidated into accepting unfavorable divorce settlements. He pulled out another file. Take Richard Henderson, Thomas's brother. We interviewed him last week, and he claims Thomas genuinely believed his wife would be scared into leaving the marriage quickly if she thought she was in danger. Richard says Thomas was shocked when Margaret actually died. But David knew, I said, thinking about the forged will and the detailed planning I'd discovered. David knew I was supposed to die. Based on the evidence, yes. David was a full participant in a murder conspiracy. Some of the other husbands were just marks who got in too deep to back out. Agent Martinez opened her laptop and pulled up a complex organizational chart. This is what we've mapped out of their operation. Miranda and her associates target men who fit a specific profile: successful, married to women with significant assets, and showing signs of midlife dissatisfaction or marital stress. The chart showed a sophisticated criminal enterprise with different teams handling recruitment, financial crimes, evidence destruction, and what was euphemistically labeled as problem resolution. It looked like something from an organized crime investigation rather than a series of domestic murders. How did they find their targets? Social media, professional networking events, country clubs, high-end dating apps for married people seeking affairs. They cast a wide net and then focus on the most promising candidates. Agent Rodriguez pulled up David's file. Your husband first appeared on their radar 18 months ago when he joined an online forum for men having marital problems. He posted extensively about feeling unappreciated at home and fantasizing about starting over with someone new. The idea that David had been advertising his dissatisfaction with our marriage to strangers online while I worked late to build our financial security was almost more painful than his betrayal itself. He'd been broadcasting his vulnerability to predators who specialized in exploiting exactly his type of resentment. Miranda made contact with him through a fake profile on a professional networking site, Agent Martinez continued. She studied his posts, his interests, his complaints about you, and crafted a persona designed to appeal to exactly what he thought was missing from his marriage. So Miranda Torres isn't even her real name? Her real name is Maria Santos. She's 34, not 28, and she has a master's degree in psychology with a specialization in manipulation and influence. She's been running cons for over a decade. The revelation that even Miranda's age and background were fabricated added another layer to the deception. David hadn't just fallen for a younger woman. He'd fallen for a carefully constructed psychological profile designed to exploit his specific weaknesses and insecurities. We need you to testify in multiple trials, Agent Rodriguez said. Your case is the keystone that will bring down their entire operation. Without your survival and investigation, we never would have connected these murders to an organized conspiracy. What happens to the other families? The wives who died? We're reopening every case. The husbands who are still alive will face murder charges. Those who are dead or missing will be presumed victims of the conspiracy. But most importantly, we'll be able to give those families answers about what really happened to their loved ones. Agent Martinez closed her laptop and looked at me seriously. Sarah, there's something else you need to know. We believe Miranda's network has been operating for at least 10 years, possibly longer. There could be dozens of additional victims we haven't identified yet. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. What I'd thought was a personal betrayal by my husband had actually been my random selection by professional killers who had been murdering wives for years. Have you located the associates Miranda mentioned? Luis in Costa Rica? We're working with international law enforcement, but it's complicated. Costa Rica doesn't have an extradition treaty with the United States for certain crimes, and Luis appears to have significant political connections there, Agent Rodriguez added. That's why we're maintaining security measures around you. Until we can confirm that all of Miranda's associates are either arrested or no longer see you as a threat, you remain at risk. The reminder that I was still potentially in danger felt surreal after weeks of focusing on legal proceedings and asset recovery. I'd been so focused on getting justice for David's crimes that I'd almost forgotten about the larger criminal network that might still consider me a liability. What about the other survivors? Richard Henderson mentioned Thomas had relatives who might have information. We're interviewing family members of all the victims, but most of them believed the official story about accidents or random crimes. You're the only one who suspected something was wrong and had the skills to investigate. Agent Martinez pulled out a business card. We'd like to offer you a consulting position with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Your experience uncovering this conspiracy demonstrates exactly the kind of expertise we need for complex fraud investigations. The offer was flattering but also overwhelming. 6 weeks ago, I'd been focused on recovering from a car accident and rebuilding my marriage. Now I was being recruited by the FBI to help investigate organized crime. Can I think about it? Of course. But Sarah, you should know that your work on this case has already saved lives. We've identified 3 men who were in the early stages of being recruited by Miranda's network. Because of your investigation, we were able to warn them and their wives before anyone got hurt. That evening, I sat in my home office reviewing everything the FBI had shared with me. The wall where David had once hung his awards and sales certificates now displayed a timeline I'd created showing the progression of his involvement with Miranda's network. Patricia called with updates on the ongoing surveillance of my house and the progress of the criminal trials. The good news is that Miranda's associates in Costa Rica appear to have disappeared, she reported. The FBI thinks they scattered when news of the arrests hit international media. The bad news is that scattered doesn't mean captured. How long? Do you think I'll need security? Hard to say. The FBI is being cautious because you're the key witness in a dozen murder cases. But honestly, Sarah, you might want to consider relocating permanently. Even after trials and convictions, some of these people have long memories. The idea of leaving my home, my career, my entire life because of David's crimes was infuriating. I'd survived attempted murder, exposed a criminal conspiracy, and was helping law enforcement bring killers to justice. The thought of running away from the life I'd rebuilt felt like letting David and Miranda win. I'm not running, I told Patricia. I've built a life here, and I'm not letting criminals drive me away from it. I understand the impulse, but Patricia, for 10 years, these people murdered wives with impunity because nobody was paying attention, nobody was asking the right questions, and nobody had the skills to connect the dots. I'm not going to hide from them. I'm going to make sure they never hurt another family. Julia arrived that evening with dinner and a concerned expression. The FBI agents called me, she said, unpacking Chinese takeout containers. They're worried about your safety, and frankly, so am I. Sarah, you've done enough. You've caught the people who tried to kill you, you've exposed their operation, and you're going to help put them in prison. Why not take the witness protection offer and start over somewhere safe? I thought about the photographs of 12 murdered wives, about the families who had never gotten justice, about the 3 couples the FBI had saved because of my investigation. Because this is bigger than just what happened to me, I said. Julia, I was randomly selected by professional killers who have been destroying families for years. I survived because I had skills they didn't expect their victim to have. That survival comes with responsibility. What kind of responsibility? The responsibility to make sure no other wife goes through what I went through. The responsibility to use my skills to help law enforcement catch these people. The responsibility to be the voice for women who can't speak for themselves anymore. Julia studied my face for a long moment. You're not going to let this go, are you? Would you? If you discovered that your attempted murder was part of a serial killing operation that had been targeting innocent families for years, would you just walk away and hope someone else dealt with it? No, she admitted. I probably wouldn't. But I'd be terrified every day. I am terrified, but I'm also angry, and I'm trained to follow financial evidence wherever it leads. Right now, it's leading to justice for a lot of people who deserved better than they got. That night, I made my decision about the FBI's consulting offer. I would accept it, but on my terms. I would help them investigate financial crimes and marriage fraud conspiracies, but I would continue living my life in my own home, refusing to be driven into hiding by criminals. The next morning, I called Agent Rodriguez and Agent Martinez. I'll take the consulting position, I told them, but I'm not going into witness protection and I'm not relocating. If you want my help catching these people, you'll get it on my home turf. Sarah, that's risky. Everything about this situation has been risky from the moment David hired someone to kill me. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I'm going to spend it making sure people like Miranda and David can't hurt anyone else. Agent Martinez was quiet for a moment. All right. We'll work with you on your terms. But the security stays in place until we're confident the threats have been neutralized. Agreed. Now, when do we start hunting down the rest of Miranda's network? The transformation was complete. I was no longer just a victim seeking justice. I was a forensic accountant with a federal badge and a personal mission to dismantle criminal organizations that preyed on families. David and Miranda had made one critical error in their planning. They'd assumed that killing me would end the investigation. Instead, surviving their attempt on my life had launched the most important work of my career, and I was just getting started. 1 year later, I stood outside the federal courthouse watching David being led away in shackles after receiving his sentence, 35 years without possibility of parole for attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. The judge had been particularly harsh, noting that David's crimes were a calculated betrayal of the most fundamental human trust. Miranda, or Maria Santos, had received life without parole after being convicted in connection with 14 murders across 8 states. Her network of associates had been systematically dismantled, with 12 additional arrests spanning 3 countries. How does it feel? Agent Martinez asked, joining me on the courthouse steps. Like justice, I replied, watching the transport van disappear into traffic. Finally. The past year had been a whirlwind of testimony, investigation, and healing. My consulting work with the FBI had led to the exposure of 3 similar criminal networks and the prevention of at least 7 additional murders. The specialized unit we'd created, focused on marriage fraud and domestic murder conspiracies, had become a model for law enforcement agencies nationwide. Patricia approached us with her final surveillance report. Carl Morrison was released. This morning, she said. Served 8 months, got early release for cooperation and good behavior. His daughter's cancer treatment was successful, by the way. I nodded. Carl's case had been complicated, a desperate father manipulated by professional criminals. His genuine remorse and complete cooperation with investigators had earned him a lighter sentence than David's other accomplices. "Any word on the Costa Rica connection?" I asked. "Luis Mendoza was arrested in Panama last week trying to cross into Colombia," Agent Martinez replied. "Turns out fleeing international murder charges makes you conspicuous to border security. He'll be extradited to face charges here within the month." My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. "Watching the news coverage. So proud of you. Dinner. Tonight to celebrate?" I smiled, thinking about how much had changed since those dark days in the hospital. Julia had moved to town permanently to be closer during my recovery and had started dating Patricia, a relationship that had surprised everyone but somehow made perfect sense. "Mrs. Chen?" A young woman approached hesitantly. "I'm Jennifer Walsh. My mother was Linda Martinez, one of the victims in Denver. I recognized her from the case files, Linda's daughter who had never believed her mother's death was an accident. I wanted to thank you," Jennifer continued, tears in her eyes. "Because of your investigation, we finally know what really happened. To Mom, the trial gave us closure we never thought we'd get." "I'm so sorry for your loss," I said, taking her hand. "Your mother deserved justice." "She did. And because of you, she got it. But more than that, you saved other families from going through what we went through." After Jennifer left, I sat on a bench outside the courthouse and reflected on the journey from that first terrible phone call in the hospital to this moment of resolution. David's betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but surviving it had led to something larger than personal: revenge. It had led to justice for dozens of families and protection for countless others. My phone rang. It was Margaret Santos with the final financial update. "Sarah, the asset recovery is complete," she announced. "Every penny David stole has been returned, plus damages and legal fees. The court also awarded you the proceeds from liquidating Miranda's assets, approximately $400,000 in jewelry, cars, and property purchased with stolen money from various victims. Donate it to the victims' families," I said without hesitation. "They need it more than I do." "Are you sure? That's a substantial amount." "I'm sure. I got my life back. That's worth more than any amount of money." That evening, Julia, Patricia, and I sat in my backyard, toasting with champagne and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. My physical therapy was complete, my career was thriving, and for the first time in over a year, I felt truly safe. "So what's next?" Patricia asked. "The FBI has offered you a permanent position." I'd been considering the offer for weeks. Leading the marriage fraud task force would mean travel, complex cases, and continued danger. But it would also mean protecting families from predators who specialized in exploiting trust and love for profit. "I'm taking it," I announced. "Someone has to make sure this never happens to another family." Julia raised her glass. "To Sarah Chen, who turned the worst thing that ever happened to her into the best thing that happened to a lot of other people." We clinked glasses. I thought about David rotting in his federal prison cell, probably still trying to convince himself that he'd been the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of his own destruction. Miranda was in maximum security. Her decade-long killing spree finally ended. Their network was dismantled, their victims remembered, and their surviving family members finally had answers. But most importantly, 3 couples were alive tonight because my investigation had identified them as targets before it was too late. Somewhere, 3 wives were tucking their children into bed, completely unaware that a forensic accountant's survival had saved their lives. The hidden camera footage that had started this entire investigation still sat in an evidence locker, David's confession preserved for posterity. But the real evidence of justice wasn't in any recording. It was in the empty prison cells that would never again house David and Miranda, and in the families that would never become their victims. I had survived David's betrayal, Miranda's conspiracy, and attempted murder. More than survived, I had thrived, found purpose, and turned personal trauma into professional mission. The woman who had lain helpless in that hospital bed 18 months ago was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and dedicated to ensuring that trust and love could never again be weaponized against the innocent. As the last light faded from the sky, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before my accident: complete peace. Justice had been served, lives had been saved, and the future was full of possibilities instead of threats. David had tried to end my story with that truck on a rainy evening. Instead, he had simply started the most important chapter of my life, and, unlike his story, mine had a happy ending. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.